Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're doing well. Today, as Anthony said, I'm the president of Radiant Solutions. We're the geospatial company of Maxar Technologies. Maxar is a company that's bringing innovation to the new space economy. We're doing that through manufacturing assets in space, owning and operating them, so flying satellites to collect satellite imagery, and then Radiant Solutions, we're the geospatial company. So we're focused on how to source different data sources, enrich that in information, enable analytics. What we wanted to talk today about was this whole issue of how to take artificial intelligence, automation, and augmentation and use that to build a better world. And so one of the things I was thinking about, we're a geospatial company at heart. I grew up in a small town in Northeast Ohio, and when I think about geospatial and how it's evolved over the years, for us, AAA, when I was growing up, we did a family reunion every year. And we would go from Northeast Ohio to New York City. And going from a small town, through the big city, we had to figure out how to get from point A to point B. And so for us, AAA, were these triptych books, from the AAA agency. But one of the things that those resources didn't provide us with was an understanding of not only what the most efficient route was, but if my brother and sister, if we had to stop at a restroom, where to do that, where to get a meal, where to avoid certain bad places that you wouldn't want to go. And so now my kids, they're used to this, right? They're used to automated tools that take massive amounts of data and allow us to navigate our planet. And so in thinking about this topic, one of the things that we wanted to do was share how our customer, one of our largest customers, the National Geospatial-Intelligence Agency, really thinks about applying these technologies to build a better world. Because we're all used to consumer applications that we're used to in Washington, D.C., how to navigate this environment. However, in whether it's the Middle East or responding to a natural disaster, if the world changes, how we respond to that is very important. And so that's essentially what we're going to cover today. I've asked Buzz Roberts to talk a little bit about both the mission of NGA as well as how AAA technologies are going to apply to it. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Tony.
Yeah.
So from an NGA perspective, by way of quick introduction, we're one of the very few intelligence agencies that actually has a global, worldwide, unclassified mission. So if any of you ride in a vehicle, ride in an aircraft, or ride on a ship, you're welcome. Part of our mission is to provide notice to mariners, safety of air navigation, and provide trafficability / terrain understanding so that, on the continental U.S., we do that in support of the United States Geospatial, USGS. And then overseas, we provide that to our allies and other U.S. assets, both to open commercial civilian communities, as well as to our allied partners for a variety of their uses in terms of their societal endeavors and what they need to do to execute their national security missions. So as a part of that, all the way back to Banda Aceh, tsunami in Thailand, all the way back to Mount Pinatubo, for those of you who go back even further, and other volcanic and natural kinds of disasters in the Philippines and elsewhere, to Deepwater Horizon, and most recently this year's hurricane season, NGA has been there providing support and data analysis along these three kinds of things by collecting data from a remote sensing perspective, collecting data from humans, as well as being able to analyze, synthesize, enrich, and deliver that data. When I came into the career field in 1982, one of the largest challenges was providing just simple data access, as well as speed of data information. So if any of you ever use a digital image, you're welcome as well. The JPEG standard and how we actually move data, each one of you who has it probably on your phone, came out of the imagery investments and remote sensing investments that were provided by the United States government. Google Earth was a partnership that we involved ourselves in, and many other aspects. I won't go through that long list, but what many of you and others take for granted today that are commonplace in how you use that, we're beginning to advantage emerging technologies. So what you'll begin to use in the future is even of greater capacity, greater applicability to your personal decision-making, as well as the decision-making from national security, humanitarian assistance, disaster relief perspective. The difference in our environment is when you sign up for terms and conditions, pick AKA App XYZ, tort law, and in those TNC, removes the producer from having any liability should you, as you're following your GPS, and a British couple actually did this, turned left and went into the lake. You cannot hold them responsible. By law, by statutory law, by regulation, and by data specification, we cannot do that. So our safety of navigation mission, for example, wouldn't reflect the terms and conditions when you step on an aircraft or a vessel and say, hey, if something goes bad, you can't hold us responsible. No, as a matter of fact, it's exactly the opposite. We are held to the absolute highest standard to ensure that the data that we provide has accuracy, pedigree, and known quality. So from an AI perspective, that's a challenge. In the automation perspective, as we're moving forward, we're moving into, with prudent evidence and data, into areas to try to leverage simple day-to-day tasks. I'll talk a little bit about, from our perspective, a real-world AI issue, but move forward with the human, mundane, and rote tasks to do a good majority of access to data, trying to enrich that information, sense-making that isn't included, but also deliver that valuable intelligence or valuable geospatial information. To do that, as we've looked at how we characterize a lot of the potential from an AI perspective, the taxonomy and the terminology in an open industrial perspective doesn't necessarily translate because of the conditions that we have in exactly the same parlance. Object class is a great example. In a real world AI perspective, from our perspective, whether it's a certain object, take a merchant vessel. There are 4 types, type 1, 2, 3, and 4, oddly enough, as well as different types of features, be they roads, buildings, classifications, things of that nature. Resolution matters, angular sensitivity and variance matter, so how we go forward and what we define things, we're beginning to characterize for our domain how we can advantage these technologies with a particular understanding of what the outcomes are, the actual requirements within our domain, and the data that we have at our disposal and availability. Some data is very noisy. Other data, we have control on the actual data and information chain, the image chain, or the production chain. Other data elements we do not. They all need an element of pedigree and quality, so we're moving forward with a deliberate and well-defined and well-engaged characterization of all the components that matter to get us to a level where we can do things at speed, at scale, with known reliability and assurance. So from an NGA perspective, perhaps our best example for this audience would again be our notice to mariners and our maritime support. The data to decision timeline, we were lucky if it was months, in some cases years. Through a series of a variety of AI technologies, we're now closing that gap to months and weeks, and hopefully within the next 18 months, we'll move that down to days and weeks, and then eventually eliminate the data to decision timeline and move forward. The daunting task, we have to go do this just from a remote sensing perspective alone. I'm sure you've heard the darkening skies pitch. It would require, and our director has stated this openly and in public, about 8 million analysts to analyze the data that we foresee within the next 5 to 10 years. That's simply not doable. So our ability to try to automate and leverage all technologies, including AI, is at the cornerstones of our planned strategies and current actions. But that's not just ours. Tony, if you'd hit the next chart. Our contributions to the intelligence community through the empirical evidence and data that we have and through collaborations with our mission partners led the DNI to push for automation across the entire national security enterprise as a top priority. The accompanying strategy behind that is the augmentation of intelligence with machines using any available technologies against well-defined outcomes as our guiding principle, and the formulation and cooperation between the Joint AI Center and the AIM Hub and AIM Center concepts are emerging as we go forward. And there's great cooperation across both the IC and DoD, as well as across our other government partners and other allied industry and academic partners as well. Next chart, please. But to pull that and to take it to a higher level, at the root of it, back down to terms matter, back down to understanding pedigree, quality, and the real-world application of these things matters. I draw your attention to the foundational initiatives. 2 talks ago in contribution of AI to American society, a lot of conversation was focused on both acquisition, tradecraft, workforce. Those same aspects are dealt with here. Anyone who spent a bit of time looking at and dealing with these problems and issues has I would argue, recognized many of these shortfalls and is taking a series of steps to scale your workforce, understand your problems, shape your digital foundation, figure out the entire ecosystem and all those interdependencies end to end. However, doing this in the abstract is not necessarily the best application. As Tony will talk about from a humanitarian assistance disaster relief, we've learned a lot from our industry partner Radiant Solutions as well as others. The AIM aspect and AIM team activities, just as the Jake is doing it through the lens of mission and through the lens of national security priorities to try to be able to ensure we are creating things at speed, at scale, with assurance and reliability, and a known understanding of what we can and cannot do, and what we do not know, as well as what we need to know. So with that, I'll leave it to Tony to run through some additional examples and give you some insights into where we're at.
Thanks, Buzz. Okay, so that sets the context for why AAA is important. What we wanted to do was transition into the how. So how are we applying these technologies to move the needle on the mission? And so to kick it off, what I wanted to do was show a brief video that gives some more context on why this is important for Maxar and Radiant Solutions, in particular. So just to tee it up, Digital Globe is one of our peer companies across Maxar. And it owns and operates a constellation of 5 satellites. Those 5 satellites collect 4 million square kilometers of imagery a day. And so the issues that Buzz referenced, which was, how are we going to scale analyzing, all that imagery, we've been focused on creating ways to bring automation and AI, to the fore to get after that. That problem is only going to get more complex over time. So as Buzz mentioned, there are hundreds of satellites, going on orbit. There's many aerial platforms with UAVs. There's all types of sensors on the ground. And so that's creating more data sources, that we have to be able to extract, at the speed of mission. If you were in the session earlier today, you would have heard Ian, talk about the fact that, for a humanitarian event, being able to respond in 48 hours is essential. The mission's going to happen, regardless. And so how we get after all this data is really important. And so we recently produced a new video to talk about, how different parts of Maxar are working together, to address this in the area of machine learning.
Machine learning is teaching a machine, to make decisions.
So machine learning is basically training computers to do tasks that people can't or don't want to do.
In one day, we collect something like 85 terabytes of data. For that 1 day's worth of collection, you'd probably be at it for about 80 years. And so machine learning is really the only way that we have of being able to deal with that data deluge.
Machine learning has been around for a while. You don't have to teach a machine what to look for. You just give it examples and it learns itself.
Machine learning algorithms can help humans take advantage of this data and derive new insights that might not otherwise be possible.
We can ask questions about everywhere on the globe. We can see where the things are changing the most quickly. We can identify patterns that have never before been possible. And we can take existing workflows and questions about the planet and apply them at a much larger scale, much more efficiently.
SpaceNet was the first of its kind to create an open data set for geospatial and machine learning consisting of satellite imagery, building footprints, and roads that could be applied with algorithms for automated mapping.
GBDX is our cloud analytics platform designed to extract meaningful insights from satellite imagery for a multiplicity of use cases in industry, government, humanitarian and global development organizations, and academia.
By using satellite imagery and machine learning, we're able to detect where populations are even in the most rural parts of the world. For example, in Tanzania, where the distribution of polio vaccines depends on where people are located.
So we're working with Gates in Tanzania to support local census activities, to map where populations are growing and changing, and to understand where development resources would be most impactful, like aid or investment for local populations.
Australia is an incredibly large continent, developed continent, but to this date, nobody has actually known with any certainty how many structures reside within the country. Using satellite imagery and machine learning, we were able to detect all the structures and map for each parcel. Where's the building? What's the vegetation like on the property? What's the roof material made of? What's the height of the building? And a whole host of other features. This aids insurance companies. This aids the financial industry. This aids emergency responders.
When we think about innovation and when we have major steps forward in technology, whether it's aviation or the personal computer, it feels like we're at a place today where machine learning and artificial intelligence are helping us do things that might not otherwise be possible.
One of our focus areas for where we're going in AI and machine learning for in-space robotics is operation farther and farther away from Earth. We've had robot arms on the space station and the space shuttle. We've had robot arms on a number of Mars rovers. As we get further away from Earth, we're less able to communicate in real time with those robots. So they need more smarts on the robot to be able to perform more advanced tasks because there's not a human who's able to be in the loop. And so that's placing the autonomous operation in a robot in space, similar to an autonomous operation of a car driving on the road, but the space environment's very different. You don't have to worry about pedestrians, but you do have to worry about bumping into other satellites. So in addition to what we're doing in robotics, we're extremely well equipped to work on another domain, which is the extraction of geospatial information from satellite imagery. Why is Maxar uniquely equipped? Well, Willie Sutton, who was a famous bank robber, was asked why do you rob banks, and he said, well, that's where the money is. In AI and machine learning, the critical thing is where's the data? Because you need data to train those machine learning models. You need lots and lots of data. And we have the data, whether it is decades of experience in in-space robotics or north of 100 petabytes of electro-optical and radar data, we have the data that can be used to train those machine learning models. The second thing we have is domain expertise. We're talking about extracting information from satellite imagery or controlling robots that are far away from Earth. And because of our customer relationships, we have that domain expertise in a way that a general practitioner would not. And the third is, of course, our people. Our people are incredibly smart, they're motivated, they're willing to leverage the tremendous amount of work that's gone on elsewhere in the industry and build on that by standing on the shoulders of the many thousands or tens of thousands of people who are working in this domain, moving us beyond.
As far as leading the charge on machine learning, deep learning, artificial intelligence, Maxar is perfectly suited because that's what we specialize in.
Maxar is developing amazing technologies in-house, but is also encouraging an entire industry to thrive. From the SpaceNet initiative, where we're making training sets available for people to build their own machine learning algorithms, to the GBDX ecosystem, where we're encouraging people to plug in their own models against our corpus of 100 petabytes of imagery. Maxar is leading a revolution, not just for its own customers or for its own employees, but for the industry as a whole.
Okay. So what I wanted to do is talk through a few examples of how we're applying this to get after the humanitarian assistance disaster response mission, and also providing the right foundation data to aid in rapid response. The first is around a recent event with Hurricane Michael. So as many of you know, this was a devastating hurricane that caused lots of damage. One of the things that we typically do, so we've supported hundreds of humanitarian events where we've made our imagery available to the public, which allows for crisis mapping on rapid timelines. One of the things that we do typically is we have a crowdsourcing platform called TomNod, where we're able to rapidly put before and after imagery out and allow people to do damage assessments. So this is the results of a campaign we executed 2 weekends ago, where in 3 hours, after having imagery that was collected from an aerial platform, we were able to compare before and after and identify which buildings were damaged, which ones were completely destroyed, and which were fine. And so these are just examples where we're showing the building footprints of the before intersected with the damage assessment that came through this crowd. So literally in 3 hours, we were able to do this assessment and get that in the hands of people who needed it. One of the things that we're really focused on now is how we enable this type of analytics at global scale. And so we've been looking at different regions of the world where we know there's densely urban populated areas, understanding the state of current mapping data, and identifying where we can further enrich that. Mexico is one of the first regions that we're focused on, and we've been working through that workflow where we would source different data, enrich that information through automation and crowdsourcing, and then use that to drive analysis to figure out where we need to create better maps. The process we go through is we start with change detection. And so there's public data sources from both Landsat and ESA, so the Sentinel-1 and 2 assets, that allow us to revisit the globe every week. And so we can understand where there's persistent change. So what we did is we took those types of algorithms, so these are raster analytics, identify where there's persistent change, and use that to prioritize different urban areas that we need to focus on to understand the next level of opportunity around enrichment. This is a set of top urban areas around Mexico, and you can see, based on the color scale, where there was the most density of change. And so we picked Reynosa as an area where we could demonstrate this end-to-end capability. This is an example of how the change detection algorithm works. And so using images that go back to 2011 from Landsat all the way up to today, we can see where there's density of change and recency of it. We use automated algorithms against low resolution imagery that identify the change indicators. And then we apply digital globe imagery to understand where that change, further characterize it. That then leads into our machine learning workflow. And so for those of you that were in the session earlier today, where our team members briefed, we talked about how for many of our customers, we're taking different forms of machine learning training data. So we're doing that through hand labeling, synthetic generation, as well as crowdsourcing, feeding that into a corpus to then create models. Those models are trained with NVIDIA hardware, inferenced with NVIDIA hardware as well. And then we use that to both create results that then can feed analytic products, as well as retrain those models. One of the ways that we create data is we use the same crowdsourcing method that I showed with the Hurricane Michael response, but we do it at a much broader scale. xView is an effort that's going to be talked about later today. We helped produce that machine learning training data set. It was consistent with our strategy to make data available to the public to facilitate research in this area. And so this just shows the workflow where we identified different areas. We had the crowd go and digitize different features and then fed that through a feedback loop, where we created 1 million labeled objects that were then made available, to the public. That training data was used to facilitate a competition. It was made available to the public for creating algorithms, and the winner of that's going to be announced later today. Those models allow us to identify different vehicle types. So an example we talked about today, earlier, we showed automobiles, but dump trucks is another type of object that was in the data set. And so if you can find out where there's dump trucks, compare it to where there are not roads and buildings, you can build a model to prioritize where you need to enrich mapping information. And so we use a tool, Signature Analyst, which again applies a different form of machine learning to be able to prioritize activity. This is an example of a map of Reynosa, and so you can see a heat map of different areas where high dump trucks, high change, low roads, low buildings, to help facilitate that level of enrichment. And that then drives a workflow to encourage mapping activity with kind of prioritized geocells. And this is what you generate at the end. So applying that whole workflow on the left, or on the right, I'm sorry, is OpenStreetMap, what's available to the public today to support disaster response. On the left is what we were able to do in a very short amount of time using these techniques of using automation for building extraction, focusing road enrichment, and then attributing key points of interest to then facilitate response. One of the ways that we're looking to further engage the community is through our SpaceNet initiative. It was referenced in the video. SpaceNet is an effort where we make machine learning training data available to the public. We also make open source tools available to facilitate research, run competitions, and then make those resulting algorithms available for advancing the state of the art. This is part of an effort where we've run multiple competitions. So there's public data available for Las Vegas, Paris, Shanghai, Khartoum, and Atlanta, where it's high-resolution satellite imagery, labeled training data, and it's available for free with a Creative Commons license for non-commercial use to improve the quality of algorithms. The competitions that we've run have been focused on different forms of mapping activity. So we started with an emphasis on building footprint extraction, moved to roads, and that's been a great way to understand where's the current state of the art and where we can take it in the future. And we've had hundreds of competitors paid out over $100,000 in prize money and made multiple algorithms available to the community in open source. Today, I'm happy to announce that we're launching the SpaceNet 4 competition. And this is a really exciting effort because we're focused on a high revisit challenge in this case. As more satellites come into orbit, there's going to be more data that's collected. Digital Globe is investing in this next generation constellation where we're going to be taking, going from the 5 satellites we have today to a much bigger constellation where we're collecting in a variety of orbits. So not just sun synchronous, but mid-inclination. As a result, we're going to be collecting images multiple times during the day. That 4 million square kilometers a day I referenced is going to move to north of 10 million square kilometers a day. And so we need algorithms that are going to be resilient to be able to keep up with that demand. And so what we did with this competition is we took a burst shot over Atlanta, and we're making that data set available to the public. It's available in Amazon today as part of their public data effort, and we're focused on running this competition to see how quality algorithms can be produced with that data set. And you can see where you can get more information about that with the SpaceNet Challenge.org link. The last thing I wanted to show, and then we can open up for questions, is an example of how this data can be applied by one of our partners, Vricon. Vricon creates 3D models on the fly with, using satellite imagery that was collected at different angles. So let's just show a quick example of that. So what you're seeing here is an example of both the 3D model that was produced from historical imagery, as well as an overlay of this multi-shot where you can see collections over the course of the day. So that's what we had, just to kind of give you an introduction to both the what AAA is, why it's important, how we're applying it today. We think that there's a massive opportunity to combine the explosion of new data sources, the advantage of accelerated computing, and collaborative innovation to build a better world.